I stood alone in the heart of the fortress, surrounded by the cold stone walls that had once felt like home. Tonight, they felt more like a tomb. Outside, the distant sounds of battle echoed, a mix of wolves and humans in a brutal clash. This war had drained us all, and every day it felt like we were inching closer to our end. My pack, Midnight Fang, was losing ground, both physically and in spirit. We were trapped by human boundaries, while hunger gnawed at us from within. But tonight, something felt different. A sense of dread settled in my chest, tightening with every passing second. My mate, Liam, had led the forces at the front lines. He was brave, always inspiring those around him. But as the hours passed, an unsettling feeling grew in me. Liam should have returned by now, I whispered to myself. The noise outside grew louder, more frantic, when suddenly the door burst open. A soldier, breathless and pale, stood before me. His eyes held a sorrow I wasn't ready to face. Before he even spoke, I knew. Liam's gone. My world shattered. My chest tightened, the ground beneath me seemed to disappear, and a raw, guttural scream tore from my throat. I collapsed to the floor, knees hitting the cold stone, grief crashing over me in waves. Liam, my mate, the love of my life, was gone. I gasped for air, struggling against the emptiness his absence left. The soldier stepped back, giving me space to grieve. My pack, my warriors, our family, gathered outside, sharing in my pain. Liam had been their leader too, their brother. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their mourning, but also their expectation. They needed me to rise. Beneath the suffocating sorrow, something else stirred. Rage. Fierce, unrelenting rage. Slowly, I rose from the floor, gripping the table for support. My body felt weak, but my heart burned with anger so fierce I could barely contain it. When I finally stood straight, I met the gazes of my pack. The tears in my eyes had dried, replaced by a fierce resolve. "Carlos," I whispered, my voice low but filled with determination. "Carlos will pay for this." Carlos, the leader of the human hunters, had been behind these attacks. Ruthless and calculating, he had taken everything from me. And now, he had taken Liam. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I knew what I had to do. I would use everything in my power to bring Carlos down. I would make him pay. I'm Freya, Alpha of Midnight Fang. I'm the kind of woman you can't ignore. I'm a born leader with sharp intellect and fast instincts. My sea-green eyes, sharp features, and long blonde hair make me stand out, but it's my strength that defines me. I'm confident in my body, strong, balanced, and powerful in every way. I have an undeniable allure, with curves that turned heads wherever I go, and I know how to use it when it's needed. I lead because I'm the best person for the job, not for power, but because my pack deserves someone who'll fight for them with everything they've got. Thorn, my most trusted advisor, leaned forward. "We're outnumbered, Freya. The humans. Carlos, especially. They're relentless." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "Which is why we won't attack head-on. I'll make Carlos come to me." They exchanged confused glances, unsure of my meaning. "Carlos doesn't know me," I explained. "He thinks he's untouchable, but I'll exploit his weaknesses." I outlined the plan. I would pretend to be a lone survivor, attacked by a wolf near the hunter's quarters. Carlos and his men would investigate, finding me as the only survivor of an attack. He'd think I was just a helpless woman. But once I had his trust, we would strike. I needed someone to sacrifice themselves, to play the role of the wolf who would be taken down by the hunters. "I'll do it," came a voice from the back. A young wolf stepped forward, his eyes filled with determination. "For Liam. For the pack." I nodded, respect swelling in my chest. "Your sacrifice will be honored." The next day, as dusk fell, I stood at the edge of the woods, waiting. My heart pounded as I prepared to face Carlos for the first time. I screamed, playing the role of the frightened woman as the wolf, our brave volunteer, fought fiercely. Carlos and his men arrived, taking the bait. Carlos was taller than I imagined, his piercing blue eyes cold and assessing. His build was strong and muscular. He had those rugged features that a woman can't ignore. His men took down the wolf with brutal efficiency. My jaw clenched, but I stayed in character, playing the part of the terrified survivor. Carlos approached me, his voice firm but with a hint of kindness. "Are you hurt?" I looked up at him, letting my eyes fill with false tears. "I'm alive," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But my family, the wolves..." Carlos's jaw tightened. He didn't trust easily, but I saw his guard lower, just a bit. "We'll escort you back," he said, turning to his men. "Make sure she's safe." I followed, knowing I had just lured him into my trap. Soon enough, I would destroy him. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of stillness that makes every breath feel amplified. A soft breeze played with the hem of my dress, and I adjusted the neckline of my simple yet elegant dress. It skimmed over my figure just enough to catch Carlos's attention, but didn't overstate anything. I didn't need to be obvious. No, that would ruin the plan. I caught a glimpse of myself in the cracked mirror, long blonde hair flowing down my back, sea green eyes gleaming with something dark. Carlos was coming to visit today. He thought it was his idea, but really, he was walking straight into my web. The knock came at the door. I didn't jump. I knew it was him. I took a breath, softened my expression into something vulnerable, and opened the door. There he was, standing like a predator assessing his prey. His eyes swept over the room first, scanning for danger, no doubt. Then, they landed on me, lingering for a split second longer than he probably intended. "Carlos," I greeted, my voice low and uncertain, like I hadn't been expecting him. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "Curiosity got the better of me," he said, his voice a deep rumble, strong enough to shake the walls. His light blue eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on me. There was a flicker of something in them, hesitation perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Won't you come in?" I stepped aside, watching him closely as he entered. His broad shoulders brushed past me, and for a moment, a surge of hatred threatened to break my calm. I could take him down right now if I wanted. But no, not yet. I wasn't done. Carlos's eyes swept the room again, his movements deliberate, as though he were cataloging every detail. "You live here alone?" I nodded, biting my lower lip just enough to seem anxious. "Yes. I've been on my own since the attacks. Lost everything. Everyone." I let my voice crack at the end, just enough to sound believable. Men like Carlos thrived on vulnerability. It fed their sense of control. His eyes flicked back to me, softer now. "The wolves?" I shuddered for effect, pretending the mere mention of the beasts terrified me. "Yes. I've been trying to stay away, but I couldn't leave. I've been with my family since I left the village." My voice laced with sadness. Inside, though, the anger simmered, barely contained. Carlos tilted his head, curiosity etched on his face. "Why did you leave the village?" "They came out of nowhere," I said, lowering my voice. "Tore through the village. My family." I paused, swallowing hard. The image of Liam's lifeless body flashed in my mind. not a memory I could fake. It was too fresh, too painful. I let the grief surface just enough to feel real, while the rage burned quietly beneath. He said nothing, just stared at me, his sharp features unreadable. His silence didn't make me uncomfortable. It was part of the game. "I can help. My team and I will keep checking on you," he said, his voice softer now, almost protective. "We'll keep you safe. You don't need to worry." Perfect. My plan was falling into place. "Thank you, Carlos. I don't know what I would do without you," I said softly. "It's my job," he replied seriously. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, my voice light, trying to shift the mood. "It's not much, but it's what I have." His jaw tightened for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to trust me, but then he nodded. I poured him a cup, my fingers brushing his as I handed it to him. His skin was warm, rough, the hands of someone who had seen battle. I could feel his eyes on me, though his gaze didn't linger on my body. The silence between us felt heavy. The only sound breaking it was the clink of his cup. He was studying me, weighing my words, unsure of whether to believe them. But I wasn't just relying on what I said. I was relying on his instincts. He finally looked at me, and I saw the briefest flicker in his eyes. He noticed. He noticed how the fabric of my dress hugged my body, how my hair fell effortlessly over my shoulders. He was disciplined, though. He didn't let his gaze linger long enough for me to catch him. But I knew. I could tell he hadn't been close to a woman in a long time. It amused me, though I kept it hidden, continuing my act, playing the part of the vulnerable woman. The seed was planted. He was intrigued, drawn to me in ways he probably didn't even understand yet. Every move was calculated, every act deliberate. No matter how strong or disciplined Carlos was, I would break him, piece by piece. And when I did, he wouldn't even see it coming. As he moved to leave, he glanced back one last time. "Be careful," he whispered, his voice low. I nodded, my eyes wide, vulnerable as though I needed him. I closed the door behind him, feeling the rage bubble inside me once more. But I smiled. It was working. The night had fallen completely, casting long shadows across the forest as I stepped out of the cottage. The crisp air bit at my skin, and the leaves crunched softly under my boots. The moon hung high, casting a silver glow over everything, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were consumed by one thing: revenge. With heightened senses, I moved quietly through the woods, my path deliberate and sure. It didn't take long to reach the hidden fortress, a place known to few, its location protected by both secrecy and magic, invisible to outsiders unless we wanted them to find it. Inside, the ministers were already waiting in the dimly lit hall. Their faces, drawn and tense, softened slightly when they saw me enter. My presence, it seemed, brought them some form of reassurance.
"Freya,"
Darius, one of the older ministers, spoke first. His voice was rough and gravelly, betraying years of hard leadership. "How is the plan progressing?" I allowed myself a slow, confident smile. "Carlos is starting to trust me," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "He's cautious, though. He's controlled, disciplined, but that's exactly why we'll succeed. The more he tries to resist, the harder he'll fall." Darius frowned.
"What's the next step?"
I let the silence hang for a moment, relishing the suspense. "You'll know when the time is right," I replied smoothly. They didn't need to know everything, not yet. "And now," I added, turning the conversation, "it's time to move the pack. I want every wolf relocated to the new site by dawn." There was a murmur of agreement, but I wasn't done. I'm not leaving until the last one is safe. Understand? I made sure to lock eyes with each of them, my tone firm. They nodded in unison, fully aware of the weight my words carried. When the meeting ended, I lingered, taking in the musty air of the old stone hall. This game of strategy and deception had to be played perfectly. One mistake, and it could all come crashing down. But I couldn't afford to fail, not with so much at stake. As the days passed, Carlos visited me more frequently. I played my role perfectly, my demeanor soft yet guarded, sharing pieces of my fabricated story, a woman haunted by loss, clinging to hope. Carlos, with his sharp mind and piercing blue eyes, watched me closely, trying to read beneath the surface. But I was always a step ahead. Despite his defenses, I could sense the cracks forming. Every time his gaze lingered just a little too long, or his voice softened when speaking to me, I knew he was starting to care. Slowly, his guard was lowering, even if he didn't realize it yet. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Carlos asked quietly, "What about your partner? Were you ever married?" I let out a quiet breath, lowering my gaze as though the memory was too painful to voice. "He's gone," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "A wolf attack." Carlos's face darkened with sympathy. His hand moved instinctively, reaching out to grasp my arm, his touch firm yet gentle. I leaned into it, allowing myself to appear vulnerable, the weight of my sorrow heavy in the air between us. But inside, I felt the satisfaction of my plan falling into place. But for now, I had to wait, to be patient. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making him feel the weight of his choices, the guilt, the regret. He needed to understand the pain of loss, just as I had when Liam was taken from me. When the time came, he would realize too late that in this game of predator and prey, he was not the hunter. The game was far from over, but I was winning. The warm light from the overhead fixture cast a soft glow around us, giving the moment an almost intimate feel. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Carlos as he stretched his arms overhead, muscles flexing under the crisp fabric of his shirt. I couldn't help but admire how his confidence filled the space. He was so sure of himself, so unbothered by the past. But I knew that would change.
"Freya,"
he said, his voice low and steady,
"I think you should give yourself a chance."
He leaned against the counter, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his usual tough exterior.
"We both could start a life together."
I smiled, a mask of understanding that felt heavy on my face. "I need to think about it," I replied, my heart pounding. I was leading him to a cliff, but I wasn't ready to let him know just how far I'd push him. He shifted the mood, lightening the air between us.
"How about you come to the club with me tonight? It'll be fun."
There was a sparkle in his eye, a kind of hope that made my stomach twist. I nodded, my pulse quickening. This was it, my chance to make him fall completely. I spent the next few hours getting ready, slipping into a sleek black dress that hugged my curves in all the right places. I added a touch of red lipstick, something bold, something that would catch his attention. When Carlos arrived, he looked sharp in a fitted blazer that accentuated his broad shoulders. His biceps flexed as he moved, and for a moment, I forgot my plan entirely, mesmerized by the man before me. The club was alive with music and laughter. As we danced, I could feel his hands on my waist, possessive yet gentle, and I reveled in the feeling. We swayed to the beat, our bodies moving in sync. It felt electric, the way he looked at me, like I was the only one in the room.
"You make me feel alive,"
he said, his voice barely audible over the music. I wanted to respond, to tease him, but instead, I let my smile speak for me. Inside, I thought. Yes, and soon you won't be able to ignore me at all. As the night wore on, the drinks flowed freely, and Carlos's laughter became more boisterous. I felt a thrill as he leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear.
"You're not a person to ignore, Freya,"
he said, slightly tipsy but still focused on me. I bit my lip, letting the moment linger. And you can't ignore me, I thought, the words echoing in my mind as he pulled me even closer, his hand resting possessively on my hip. After a few more dances, we stumbled out into the cool night air, our laughter mingling with the distant sounds of the club. The walk back to my cottage felt charged with something electric, something dangerous. Every step was filled with the tension of what was to come. Once inside, Carlos's demeanor shifted. The door shut behind us with a soft thud, and suddenly the air felt thick with expectation. He turned to me, his gaze intense, and in an instant, the playful laughter was replaced by a raw hunger. He surprised me, pulling me against him with a fierce intensity that stole my breath. I could feel the heat radiating from him, and the air between us crackled with tension. Carlos pushed me gently against the wall, holding my wrists above my head. I had to bite my tongue to keep from gasping. It felt thrilling, exactly what I needed. His lips found mine, fierce and demanding, and I responded in kind, pouring every ounce of my intention into that kiss. I could feel him fighting to keep control, and I reveled in it. I was in charge, and I knew it.
"Freya,"
he murmured between kisses, his voice ragged.
"You don't understand how long I've wanted this."
His hands roamed my body, exploring, claiming. I let him take what he wanted, feeling my own resolve weaken under the weight of his touch. But deep inside, I reminded myself, I had to stay focused. I needed to push this further. He shifted his hold, pulling me onto his lap. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, and I could feel the urgency in his movements.
"I want you,"
he said, his voice low and sincere. As the moment escalated, I knew it was time to strike. "Carlos," I said softly, my voice a mix of vulnerability and confidence. "What's going to happen when the humans come again? What's your plan?" He paused, the question hanging in the air like a heavy fog. I could see the conflict in his eyes. For a split second, I thought he might push me away, but lost in the moment he began to reveal everything.
"We're planning a strike near the Southern Valley,"
he blurted out, the words tumbling from his lips as if he couldn't help it.
20 men, high-powered rifles. They think they can take us by surprise."
I felt a rush of satisfaction at his confession. This was what I needed. He was spilling secrets, trusting me without even realizing it. I leaned closer, pretending to be terrified, desperate for his protection. "Carlos," I whispered, searching his eyes. "What if they attack first?" He leaned in, his forehead touching mine, and I could feel the tension in his body.
"They won't,"
he said fiercely.
"Not if I have anything to say about it."
He kissed me on the forehead, tenderly, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he pulled back, clearly pleased with himself.
"I want this," he said softly. "More than just tonight. I want you every day."
I smiled. "You are such a fool, Carlos," I thought in mind. The plan was falling perfectly into place. The more he trusted me, the more I could manipulate him. "Don't worry, Carlos," I replied, my voice steady and confident. "You will have me. Just wait and see." And with that, I knew I was one step closer to my revenge. It felt exhilarating. Too exhilarating. I had him where I wanted him, and nothing would stop me from carrying out the plan. As soon as Carlos left my cottage, I felt the weight of the world settle back onto my shoulders. I watched him walk away, his silhouette swallowed by the darkness of the night. My heart raced, not from the thrill of his touch, but from the looming task ahead. Revenge was a powerful motivator, and it pulsed through my veins like fire. I rushed to the fortress, my feet barely touching the ground as I made my way through the moonlit woods. The trees whispered secrets around me, their branches swaying gently in the cool night air. This place, my stronghold, was where plans would take shape. I pushed open the heavy doors, the creaking sound echoing through the empty halls. As I entered the main chamber, my ministers stood at attention, their faces shadowed in the dim light. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the moment. This was my domain, and I needed to take charge. "We have intel on the humans," I said, my voice steady, masking the turmoil inside. "They're planning to attack. We will wait for them to enter our territory, and then we'll strike without warning." The ministers nodded, exchanging glances filled with determination. I could feel the air thicken with anticipation. This was what I had prepared for, what I had been training my pack for. "Intensify the training sessions," I ordered, my gaze sweeping over them. "Every wolf must be ready. I will not join this battle." Their eyes widened in surprise, and one minister stepped forward. "But Freya, you're our alpha. Your presence is crucial." "I said no," I snapped, the urgency of my plan surging through me. "Make sure Carlos is not dead. I need him alive, and I need him to believe I'm on his side." As I watched them disperse to carry out my orders, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But beneath that satisfaction was a swirling storm of conflict. I was entrapped in a dangerous dance, and Carlos was becoming more entangled in my web every day. Days turned into a routine of tension and intimacy. Carlos, driven by his own hunger, became increasingly possessive. He would surprise me with little gifts, trinkets from the human villages, stories that made me laugh, moments that seemed to dissolve my anger, even if only for a breath. I appreciated the way he made me feel cherished, but it only fueled the fire of my rage toward him. His hands, once a source of annoyance, now felt like a soothing balm. But every time he brushed my arm, every time his lips lingered too long on my skin, I reminded myself of the darkness that lay ahead. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting a muted light across the cottage. Today was the day of the battle, and I could feel it in my bones, a mix of tension and anticipation swirling inside me. Carlos sat at the small kitchen table, looking at me with those eyes that had grown more possessive over the last few weeks. His lips curved into a half-smile as I poured him a cup of tea. He reached for my hand, pulling me closer to him, his touch lingering longer than usual. His lips found the side of my neck, leaving a trail of warm kisses that I had grown used to, part of the act. I stiffened for a brief moment, reminding myself why I was doing this. "Freya," he said, his voice deep but soft. "I don't know if I'll come back today." His words hung in the air, his hand tightening around mine. "But promise me something. Live your life to the fullest, no matter what happens." I smiled, but inside I was already laughing. "You'll come back, Carlos. I won't give you an easy way out." I nodded, keeping my face calm, soft even. I had to play this part perfectly. Before the tea could cool, Carlos left to lead the humans into battle. The plan was set. The wolves would attack before the humans had a chance to strike, catching them off guard. We had trained for this. I had prepared them. The battle was swift. Our wolves hit their camp with a force they hadn't expected. Chaos erupted as howls filled the air, mixing with the screams of the humans. Blood stained the earth as bodies fell on both sides, and amid it all, Carlos was there, fighting, leading. But he wasn't invincible. I watched from a distance, hidden, as Carlos was struck by one of my own, a gash that tore through his side, deep enough to slow him, but not enough to kill. Perfect, I thought. He wouldn't die today. Not yet. After the fighting had calmed and the sun began to set, I returned to my cottage, where Carlos had already been brought, wounded and weak. I had to make it look real, like I was concerned. So, I went to him, sat by his side, and carefully began to clean his wound. He winced as I pressed a cloth against the torn skin, lost in thought. His muscles tensed beneath my hands, but I wasn't really there with him. My mind was already thinking about tomorrow, about how I would use the information I needed from him to plan the next strike. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pulling myself back into the moment. Carlos groaned but smiled weakly.
"It's okay,"
he said, his voice low and ragged.
"You always take care of me."
Before I could respond, he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest. His skin was warm, his breath shallow. His body pressed against mine, firm and possessive, the weight of him almost suffocating. But I let him hold me. I had to. That night, I slipped away as soon as I was sure Carlos was asleep. His breathing had evened out, the rise and fall of his chest steady, and I knew this was my chance. I made my way back to the fortress, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of what was to come. The doors creaked open as I pushed my way inside, the smell of damp stone filling my lungs. My ministers were already waiting for me, their faces filled with anticipation. I told them everything Carlos had said. "Tomorrow," I began, my voice low but steady. "They'll attack again." He told me everything. Where they'll be, how many men, what kind of weapons. I could see the determination in their eyes as I laid out the details. This is it, I thought. This is how I'll bring him down. Every day bled into the next, each one more intense than the last. I met with Carlos in the small hours, his wounded body barely managing to conceal the fire in his eyes. I had learned how to read him, to decipher the flickers of emotion that crossed his face, the frustration, the determination, and even the vulnerability. Each night, he fed me information, spilling secrets of his team like a leaky vessel. And each night, I took those pieces of intelligence straight to my pack, solidifying our strategy for revenge. With each human life lost, Carlos's team dwindled, while ours grew stronger. The whispers of our impending victory echoed through the air like a haunting melody, promising blood and retribution. Yet beneath that, I could sense Carlos's growing unease.
"Freya,"
he said one evening, his brow furrowed with worry as we sat in the flickering candlelight of my cottage. "I feel like there's someone in our ranks who's betraying us." His voice was heavy, his frustration palpable, but I couldn't help but smile inwardly. Oh, Carlos, if only you knew. I had a meeting with my ministers that night, and I knew it was time to push the final call for our attack. We gathered in the fortress, the air thick with anticipation and purpose. "This is it," I said, pacing in front of them. "Tomorrow, we will strike hard. Most of their team has already been decimated, and the few who remain will either perish or be taken as prisoners. This isn't just a battle, it's revenge. For Liam, for our ancestors who fought bravely, and for every drop of blood spilled by those who thought I was nothing but a terrified woman." "What about Carlos?" a minister asked curiously. "He will be our prisoner by tonight," I said. The roar of my pack echoed through the stone walls, a chorus of defiance and strength. It sent shivers down my spine, electrifying me with the thrill of what was to come. Together, we howled into the night, making the humans shiver in fear, each sound a reminder that their time was running out. After the meeting, I returned to my cottage, anticipation and adrenaline coursing through my veins. But as I entered, something felt off. Carlos wasn't there. The silence hung heavy in the air, and a knot formed in my stomach. Where was he? Just as I was about to worry too much, the door creaked open, and he stepped in. His face was strained, pain etched into every line. I couldn't figure out what was bothering him.
"Freya,"
he said, his voice low and almost pleading.
"Tonight, I want you to feel in a different way."
I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piquing my interest. Different how? He took a step closer, his gaze intense.
"I want to tie you up, wrap you in rope."
I felt a rush of excitement at his words, a thrill tinged with apprehension. This was new territory. "Okay," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm in." His eyes sparkled with mischief, and I couldn't help but smile. The tension between us shifted, charged with an energy that was intoxicating. Carlos worked carefully, his hands deft as he wrapped the rope around my body. I felt the fibers tighten, a thrilling mix of restraint and security. He slowly securing the knots. The ropes felt tight against my skin, but I didn't mind. There was a thrill to it, a sense of surrender that made my heart race. As Carlos finished binding me, I noticed the flicker of something deeper in his eyes, a mixture of love and betrayal, a confusing storm that I could hardly read.
"Are you okay?"
he asked. "Perfectly fine," I assured him, "but I am not." His eyes fell to the ground. "What happened?" I asked, looking into his eyes, searching for the answers.
"You know,"
he began, his voice low.
"I went to a witch today."
I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "For what?" He looked at me, his expression serious.
"She told me the betrayer is someone whom I love with all my heart."
My stomach dropped, a sinking feeling replacing the thrill.
"You know, Freya, who is that woman?"
His words felt like a blade cutting through the air. Guilt clawed at me, tightening around my throat. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out.
"I thought you loved me," he continued. "But you didn't. How foolish I was to think that. I did everything I could for you, and yet you betrayed me."
The hurt in his eyes only deepened as he continued.
"And now, even if I don't want to, I have to put you in our prison."
Before I could process it, he kissed me fiercely. I felt the heat of his lips, the desperation behind the kiss. I kissed him back, knowing this might be our last moment together. But as he started to drag me, "Stop!" I commanded, pulling with all my strength. Carlos paused, surprise etched on his face as he realized the depth of my resistance. "What?" he asked, bewildered. "You know half of the truth," I replied, taking a deep breath. "The witch told you I betrayed you, but did she tell you who I am?" He looked at me, confusion swirling in his eyes.
"Who are you?"
In that moment, I felt the change begin. My body shifted, a surge of power coursing through me as I transformed into my true form. The ropes snapped like threads, falling away as I embraced my wolf side. "I am the alpha of the Midnight Pack," I declared, my voice deepening with strength. "The same pack that you and your family have haunted for centuries." The shock on his face was priceless, but I pressed on, feeling a mix of anger and vulnerability. "I hated you every time we were intimate, every laugh we shared. But in those moments, I started to love you. My pack means everything to me, more than you, more than myself, and I will never go against them. They trust me." I took a step closer. "So, I give you a last chance. Flee. Go far away, and never come back." Carlos's expression hardened.
"My family died fighting your kind,"
he said, his voice low and resolute.
"I won't flee. I'd be happier to die,"
he said. I felt the weight of his words settle in the air between us, heavy and charged. A silence fell over us, each heartbeat echoing the impending battle that loomed on the horizon. I swallowed, my heart beating in my ears. This wasn't how I'd imagined it ending. Not like this. But the rage that had driven me for so long, the need for revenge, it still boiled inside me, clashing violently with something else, something softer. But there was no turning back now. We both leaped at each other, the air between us thick with tension, but I held back. I knew I could overpower him easily, but the thought of ending him... No, not like this. He was unarmed, a human, and though the memories of my pack, my ancestors, and Liam flashed before my eyes, I couldn't bring myself to use my full strength. Carlos, however, fought with everything he had. I could see it in the way his fists clenched, his jaw tight. He was determined, even though we both knew this was a fight he couldn't win. He managed to land a few punches, but they were weak, shaky. I could feel his energy fading. Every strike from me, even the softest ones, seemed to drain him. His breath was labored now, his movements slower. Then, it happened. He collapsed into my arms. For a moment, time stopped. I caught him, his weight heavy against me, and I lowered us both to the ground. His breathing was shallow, barely a whisper, as he lay there, his head resting against my chest. I could feel the warmth leaving him, and panic surged through me. His eyes fluttered open, just barely.
"Take care of yourself,"
he whispered, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. And then, nothing. I sat there, cradling him, my heart aching in a way I never thought possible. This was the man I had hated, the man I had planned to destroy. And yet, in this moment, all I could feel was loss. The weight of it crushed me, stealing the breath from my lungs. I kissed him gently on the forehead, my lips lingering as tears spilled down my cheeks. I stayed like that for a while, holding him close, my mind a mess of regret and sorrow. Dawn had broken by the time I finally moved. The faint light of the morning sun crept through the cracks in the cottage walls, casting a soft glow on the room. The sound of footsteps outside pulled me back to reality. The ministers. They were coming. I gently eased Carlos's head onto the floor, brushing a hand through his hair one last time before I stood. Wiping the tears from my face, I slowly rose, my legs trembling beneath me. I stepped over to the corner of the room, where my armor lay. Piece by piece, I put it on, each movement mechanical, detached. The weight of the armor felt different this time, heavier. I buckled my shoes, the leather creaking as I tightened the straps, and stood up straight, steeling myself for what was to come. But before I faced them, I turned back to the cottage, to the man who now lay still within. "Goodbye, Carlos," I whispered to myself, letting the last piece of my heart harden before I took my place at the front. But Carlos's words echoed in my mind, a ghost that wouldn't leave me. Take care of yourself. I wouldn't forget him. But I had to keep moving forward. The final battle awaited, and I would face it with every ounce of strength I had left.